Back in February, there was a game that came out that got a little bit of spark from the news because it was a multiplayer survival game where you had to go into Epstein's island, you know, the very famous island, and you had to defeat a bunch of bosses by crafting some armor, some weapons, some gear, before you could finally face off against the big guy himself. I remember playing it on day of release, and almost immediately I just knew it was going to be a train wreck, because based off the gameplay and the trailers, you could see that it was just a generic survival game that Galaxyverse Studios whipped up with a bunch of flipped assets that made no sense on how they went together. And they just decided to slap a couple of popular names to the characters that were associated with Epstein to kind of just sell the idea that this was an official Epstein game. Well, you know, as official as it can be when you're using names like Have King, Minwell Clinton, you know, all just to avoid getting into any actual legal trouble with the people associated with it. So within like 3 minutes of playing Epstein, you could tell you got clickbaited. Like, you just got tricked into buying something that you normally would never even think about looking at. But apparently, this little trick of using popular names like Epstein on your generic video games works so well that Galaxyverse Studios felt like they just had to do it again. So they threw out the sequel that nobody asked for, Epstein 2. But this time they decided to do something different because they scrapped the open world survival genre and they just made the game into a first-person zombie horror that, you know, at least as far as I could tell, has absolutely no continuity with the first game. But I still felt like almost an obligation to check the game out for myself because I was really into poking fun at the original one when it came out, so why not do it a second time? Now, I will say that the only reason I even know about Epstein 2 being released is because the developer sent me an email offering me 2 free Steam keys for the game. You know, because apparently they saw my previous videos and maybe they thought I was praising it instead of, you know, actually making fun of it like I was. I don't know how they got to that conclusion, but I ignored the email and decided to buy the game for myself because it just didn't feel right accepting free Steam keys for a game that I was going to make a video on, most likely bashing it. But they still decided to send the Steam keys anyways, so yeah, here you go. Leave a comment if you claim them, but you know, by the time we're watching this, they're probably already gone. But now let's talk about Epstein 2, because while I was playing the game, I found a bunch of frustrating things I want to talk about, just in case you were wondering if it's worth buying the game for yourself or not. And spoiler alert, it's not worth it. So the game starts with you playing as Michael J on Epstein Island. The J probably stands for Jackson, but we can neither confirm nor deny that, and you're looking for evidence on the island to find your mom that for some reason has gone missing inside of the island. And here I thought only children went missing on Epstein Island. But I guess technically anybody could go missing on this island considering how dark it is to be able to even see anything. Like, I understand that scary games use darkness to make the situations feel more tense, but like, even with the brightness turned all the way up, I had no idea where I was going half the time. But basically your objective is to go to Epstein Mansion and look for these notes that sort of just spell out the story for you of what happened to your mom and what Epstein's been up to ever since he faked his own death back in 2019. Also, the objective is to just look for these room keys that are going to take you from one room to the next so you can get scared in each room, so it's a pretty linear concept in my opinion. But my main problem with the game is that nothing in the gameplay really hints at what you're supposed to do. Like, you get these random objectives whenever you walk into a room, like find 3 lockpicks for example, even though the game never gives you a reason to think why you even need those lockpicks in the first place. It's like the game tells you instead of showing you what you need to do. But again, like within 3 minutes of playing, you can already tell that it's just another hollow experience. It's the same strategy that they used with the first Epstein game, where they just made a pretty surface level experience and just changed a couple of names around, added a few pentagrams and bloodstains around the room, and just called it a masterpiece. One thing I will say that I kind of enjoyed about the game is that I was always looking out for these references to the actual Epstein documents, which is the only reason you're playing the game in the first place. But like 95% of the time, you get a bland horror game experience, and the other 5%, you get these little notes that you found that talked about Epstein and Trump and whoever else is involved in this whole thing. But in the Steam page, it talks about how the game is all about survival and collecting equipment to protect yourself from like these aggressive test subjects, which are really just like the most generic ass looking zombies you'll ever see. Like, they got these straight off from the generic zombie app store. What? But like during the entire mansion portion of the game, you don't even get to fight the zombies. Like, there's no real sense of urgency or danger inside the mansion. It's really just a couple of like Minecraft cave sounds that trigger every now and then, and maybe like 2 jump scares total. And I'm a big scaredy cat when it comes to playing these horror games because I absolutely hate the cheap jump scares. But even the ones in Epstein 2 were so cheap that I could get through them. But once you finish up opening up all the doors in the mansion and you get access to the elevator, that's when you can go down to the tunnels tunnels that lead to the hospital where Jeffrey was doing all his experiments on people, and finally you run into some zombies and some action sequences. You can actually get into some combat here, but honestly, at this point, you gotta ask yourself why you're still playing this in the first place, because it's only gonna get worse from here. Like for example, when you actually get the chance to fight the zombies, they have the AI equivalents of a toaster oven. They're super slow and they will just stop chasing you after a little bit, so you can just literally run past them to get all the clues you need to unlock the secret room where you get your first weapon, and once you have your weapon, well, killing the zombies is also a snooze fest, because they just die with one hit, and their attacks are too slow for them to even be seen as a threat. The game also has a crafting system and a limited space inventory system, and you can get healing potions, first aid kits, and herbs, but honestly speaking, you're never gonna need any of those healing items in combat in the game, so everything so far, super underwhelming. The entire section of the tunnels was honestly just pretty boring. A lot of the times I just found myself walking around hugging walls and looking for anything I could interact with because the objectives are pretty vague at this point. Like it was all about finding a valve to clear the toxic gas that was flooding the area, which was then met with one time encounter that you actually took any sort of damage. But this is where I found another thing about the game that honestly just made it a sort of deal breaker for me, because it's the thing that made me rage quit twice. And it was the Escape from Tarkov style inventory management where you had to make everything fit like if you're playing Tetris. But like the funny thing about the inventory in this game is that some items like lampshades, the candlestick, the axe, or like the flashlight, yeah, you can't drop those items no matter what. And for some reason in this game, I just felt like a kleptomaniac. I just had to pick up everything I saw on the floor. So I ended up with 2 flashlights, 2 axes, and I think like 2 lamps. So later in the game, when I got to the hospital part of it, and I needed to refuel a generator, well, I got soft locked out of the game because I just couldn't pick up the gas canisters because my inventory was full and I couldn't drop anything. And at that moment, I just turned the stupid game off and went to go play something else because, yeah, I was not about to start the whole game all over again. Until I cooled off for a bit and decided to go at it again because, you know, I wanted to be fair in the video. But the hospital part of the game was almost as bad as the mansion part, except somehow it was even darker and stupider. There was a puzzle that I don't think was even coded properly, because I've done plenty of these type of puzzles before, but like this one in specific just had no logic on how to solve it, so I was really just pressing buttons until I got it. But overall, if I had to compare this game to Epstein 1, maybe it's because I prefer open world survival games or something, but Epstein 2 really just was not fun for me. In Epstein 1, there was a lot of customization with building houses and crafting weapons, and the fact that you could physically see that you were on an island at least sold the idea of it being an Epstein Island game better than what Epstein 2 did. At the very least, in Epstein 1, I could connect with some friends and just, you know, mess around in the island for a bit. Meanwhile, in this one, it feels like they strayed even further from the concept. It's almost like someone took a Resident Evil game that was made on Roblox and they just swapped all the character names around to make them related to Epstein. But Epstein 2 really is the Dragon Ball evolution of Epstein games, which really isn't that high of a bar to begin with, considering that Epstein 1 was the last airbender of Epstein games. But overall, if I were to have to give a verdict on this game, whether you should buy it or not, I would say just don't waste your money on this one, really. I don't think it's worth it, not at all. But yeah, that's all I really want to talk about with you guys, so thank you guys for watching.